Hi, my name is Kaylynn, and this is my husband, Brad. God has done an amazing work in both of our lives, and we are super excited to share it with you today.
Yeah, when I was 22 years old, I had my first seizure. And at the time, not having any idea what was going on, what it was terrifying. It was on a random Sunday afternoon. I was not feeling right, and I decided to take a nap because I thought that would fix it. And I just remember waking up in the back of a ambulance, and again, not knowing having any idea what had just happened, I had a panic attack, and the first responders had to give me a shot to sedate me, and I did not wake up again for a couple more hours, and I was in the emergency room. When I did wake up in the emergency room, I was surrounded by a lot of people, a lot of really important people in my life, and I had learned that my parents were already on an airplane flying to where I was at because they had been called. And having seen these people, knowing that my parents were already on a plane, and still not having known what just happened, it was terrifying. And so I did learn that I had a seizure. They had already done a CT scan and MRI. They found out a little bit why it had happened, and so they shared that with me. And I was put on some medication that was supposed to hold the seizures at bay, and it did for a while. The seizures, it was something I struggled with, but it was very moderate. It wasn't real serious until several years later. I had moved up to this area, into Columbiana, Ohio, and I had met my now wife Kaylynn. We were dating at the time, and that's when things took an interesting turn with my seizures.
Right. I noticed that Brad was having some strange behaviors. He would make some chuckling sounds. He would make some moaning sounds, and I would be like, "Well, what was that?" And he had no idea what I was talking about. These behaviors would occur daily, some days many more times than others. But as they became more frequent, I started doing a little bit of my own research and had to have a conversation with Brad that I was fairly certain he was having partial seizures.
And that was difficult to hear because when they would happen, I had no idea what was going on. I was incoherent when it would happen. And so some of the things that she would tell me that I did, and having no idea that I was actually doing those things, it was difficult to hear. It really was. So we had connected with some doctors here in the area, and with what was going on, the doctors weren't really sure how to approach it, how to attack it. So what they had decided was just keep upping the medication that I was already on, and it wasn't really working. So at that time, Kaylin had come in touch with somebody who referred her to the Cleveland Clinic. So I think it was actually you who had called and got in touch with the Cleveland Clinic and scheduled our first appointment. And no, sorry, go ahead.
So while we were just trying to figure out which avenue to take next, trying to figure out what direction to go, and finally having an opportunity to try to schedule with the Cleveland Clinic, we were in church one morning, and during worship, I heard the voice of God like he was standing next to me. And just clear as day, he said to me, Brad is going to live a seizure-free life. And knowing that God is a promise keeper, I grabbed a hold of that promise, and I knew that everything was going to be all right.
Yeah, and when Kaylin told me that, I believed it and I was excited for it. So, starting with the Cleveland Clinic, their approach was they wanted to experiment with some different medications and see how those went. And depending on how that went, if we needed to get to that point, surgery was going to be kind of the last avenue that we took that would correct it. And so we did. We tried some different medications. We experimented with some things, and it would work for a while. but then the seizures would come back. So my body would get used to the medications, and the seizures would return. And so we got to the point where I was taking a very high dose of medication, and they didn't want to take it any higher. I was taking 5,000 milligrams of different seizure medications daily, and they didn't want to take it higher than that. So we decided, okay, let's explore surgery. And so the first step was I went and I spent a week in the monitoring unit up at the Cleveland Clinic, where they connected me to a whole bunch of wires to a whole bunch of different monitoring units, and they took me off all of my meds, and they wanted me to have seizures. They wanted to see what was going on, where all the activity was, so they could pinpoint in order to do a surgery.
So as we were in the monitoring unit, and Brad was hooked up to all the electrodes, and we were just waiting for him to have a seizure so that they can collect the information that they needed. It was a very scary time for both of us. I had to really grab a hold to God's promise. At the time, I was 8 months pregnant and sleeping in a chair next to him. Just knowing that God is faithful. And as we experienced this first round with the monitoring unit, Brad didn't have any seizures.
Yeah.
And we started to get a little bit discouraged. But we knew that the story wasn't over.
Right. So they were able to get some information, but the next step to all of this, because I didn't have any seizures, was to take a much more invasive route. So several months later, I went back in and they did an exploratory brain surgery. And what they did was they drilled 13 holes in the right side of my brain here and inserted metal rods which were filled with electrodes on it. And the same approach, they took me off my medication, cold turkey, and they wanted me to have seizures. I needed to have seizures, so all these electrodes were sensing, and they could, again, just see exactly what was going on, where it was going on at. And so I went in, I had that surgery, and it was a very difficult surgery to have. It was painful, it was. And they took me off all of my medications. And, just with the timing, God's timing is perfect, but for us looking at it as humans, it was difficult because it was going to be her first week back to work after maternity leave.
Right. We had a 3-month-old at this time, and her and I were staying in Cleveland with Brad as he was once again connected to a bunch of wires, in bed, miserable. And we're all just kind of sitting around waiting for seizures to happen. And day after day after day after day, we're waiting and nothing is happening. And I really thought that we would all come home as a family, and then I would go back to work and we'd have our answers, but it didn't quite work out like that. I went home on a Saturday and figured I needed Sunday to prepare for my return to work. So Sunday morning, the baby and I went to church, and because it's the only thing that I knew to do, we just prayed and prayed and prayed, and our prayer team at church joined in, and we just really pursued God and some answers, praying for Brad to have a seizure.
And God came through. Starting that Sunday, from Sunday afternoon till early the next morning, I had 12 seizures. So barely more than 12 hours, I had 12 seizures. And I was having them so rapidly, and they were so intense that they actually had to give me what they called an emergency medication to get them to stop. So that's how intense it was, which is great. They prayed and God answered, and he answered in a powerful, powerful way. And so I don't remember any of it, fortunately. And I just remember waking up on that Monday morning, the doctor came in with a smile on his face saying that was fast. We all have all the information we need. We're going to do the surgery to get the electrodes out, and you're going to go home Wednesday. And just it was that fast. And so I had the second surgery to get the electrodes out, went home, and after that it was just needed time for the swelling in the brain to go down before I could come back and now do the actual surgery where they were going to get rid of what was going on. And that happened 4 years ago yesterday. We're filming this on the 28th. It was April 27th, 4 years ago, 2017, where I had the brain surgery where they went in with lasers and they burned off a small part of the brain where the seizures were coming from. And so it's just, this is God's timing as well. That is on the 4 year anniversary that I had this surgery, and since then I've been seizure free.
Hallelujah.
And yes, amen. It's like it was a very difficult time going through it, but looking back, it seems like it was now looking back, it was just that it was so simple, and it's just a huge blessing, and it really is. It was all a God thing from start to finish. Even before it started, it was planned out.
Absolutely, and God keeps His promises,
Yeah.
and that's really the lifeline that we clung to through this entire process.
Yeah. Yeah.